time it is. It's Storytime After Dark. Hi, what's up? How's it going? Let's see. I want to do something a bit different. Actually, yeah, that's gonna work. So I have a new friend joining us for our evening reading. I know it's been a couple of weeks since I've been on here, so I do apologize. As I've said before, Storytime with Chris After Dark is specifically for my adult fans from the ages of 18 and above. If you are not 18 and above, you should not be watching this video. This story is made for a much more mature audience. Not to say that you are immature. It's just the content is more so made for adults and not for my young viewers and the children that watch the show. So if you are watching this video, you need to log off. This is not meant for you. This is meant for the adults. Last warning, this is meant for 18 and older. If you are not 18 and older, you should not be watching this video. And no, I don't own the music that you're listening to in the background. Yeah. I brought a friend. I think I'm gonna have to lower my camera just a tad so y'all can actually see him. Oh, actually, this works very nice. This is the Green Man, the man of the forest. Too hot. That's why it's gotta be careful lighting candles. Ow! No worries. Just got a little too close to the flame. There we go. Yeah. Whoop! Gotcha. Oh, it was on something. Sorry. Okay. That works better. Alrighty then. I got Mr. Green Man over here. We are back with our continued reading of Gregory MacGuire's Wicked. I will be here fairly more consistently on Fridays because I'm no longer having to work Friday evenings like I was doing in the past. And so I will be here more consistently. So yeah, thank you for your patience. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Take a sip of my tea first, though. The music, however, is not giving the mood that I want. It is beautiful, though. It's very beautiful. Tuxedo mask, no. No, we don't need that just yet. I think this one should do it. Yeah. There it is. All right. So the last time we were here, we just found out about the murder, and I called it for what it is, the murder of Dr. Dillamon while he was researching how animals and humans of Oz are genetically the same. They have the same DNA, which is true in real life, but apparently in the land of Oz, it's enough to get you. So we are going to go ahead and continue our reading. The Charmed Circle. There was no doubt in the minds of anyone who had seen the corpse that the correct word, was murder. The way the pelt about the neck had bunched up, caked together like an improperly cleaned worker's paintbrush, the raw amber hollow in the eye. The official story was that the doctor had broken a magnifying lens and stumbled across it, cutting an artery in the process, but nobody believed it. The only one they could think of to ask, Amma Clutch, merely smiled when they came to visit, with handfuls of pretty yellow leaves or a plate of late Pertha grapes, excuse me. She devoured the grapes and chatted with the leaves. It was an ailment no one had ever seen before. Glinda, for out of some belated apology for initial rudeness to the martyred goat, she now called herself as he had once called her. Glinda seemed to be stricken dumb before the fact of Amma Clutch. Glinda wouldn't visit nor discuss the poor woman's condition, so Elphaba sneaked in once or twice a day. Bach assumed that Amma Clutch suffered a passing malady, but after 3 weeks, Madame Morrible began to make sounds of concern that Elphaba and Glinda, still rubies, had no chaperone. There we go. That's perfect. She suggested the common dormitory for them both. Glinda, who would no longer go to see Madame Morrible on her own, nodded and accepted the demotion. It was Elphaba who came up with the solution, mostly to salvage some shred of Glinda's dignity. Thus it was that 10 days later, Bach found himself in the beer garden of the Cock and the Pumpkins, waiting for the midweek coach from the Emerald City. Madame Morrible didn't allow Elphaba and Glinda to join him, so he had to decide for himself which 2 of the 7 passengers alighting were Nanny and Nessa Rose. The deformities of Elphaba's sister were well concealed. Elphaba had warned him Nessa Rose could even descend from a carriage with grace, providing the step was secure and the ground flat. He met them and said hello. Nanny was a stewed plum of a woman, red and loose, her old skin looking ready to trail off but for the tucks at the corners of the mouth, the fleshy rivets by the edges of the eyes. More than a score of years in the Badlands of Quadling Country had made her lethargic, careless, and saturated with resentment. At her age, she ought to have been allowed to nod off in some warm chimney nook. Good to see a little munchkin, lad, she murmured to Bach. It's like the old times. Then she turned and said into the shadows, Come, my poppet. Had he not been warned, Bach would have taken Nessa Rose's Elphaba's sister. She was by no means green, or even blue-white like a genteel person with bad circulation. Nessa Rose stepped from the carriage elegantly, gingerly, strangely, sinking her heel to touch the iron step at the same time as her toe. Walking as oddly as she did, she drew attention to her feet, which kept eyes away from the torso, at least at first. The feet landed on the ground, driven there with a ferocious intention to balance, and Nessa Rose stood before him. She was, as Elphaba had said, gorgeous, pink, slender as a weak stalk, and armless. The academic shawl over her shoulders was cunningly folded to soften the shock. Hello, good sir, she said, nodding her head very slightly. The valises are on top. Can you manage? Her voice was so smooth and oiled as Elphaba's was serrated. Nanny propelled Nessa Rose gently toward the handsome cab that Bach had engaged. He saw that Nessa Rose did not move well without being able to lean backward against a steadying hand, which is actually rather interesting because here in the real world, we do have individuals who are either born with no arms or due to an accident have to have them removed, and yet they can still live very feasible, possible lives. It's very true. And these are amazing people who do not let a slight inconvenience, and I say slight, stop them from living life. And so I love the representation in that. I love the support of people who are just different, and it's okay to be different. Oh yeah, that's way better. Oh, I thought somebody was at my door. Sorry. I was like, I heard a noise. So now Nanny has to see the girls through their schooling, said Nanny to Bach as they rode along. What with their Satan mother in her waterlogged grave these long years, and their father off his head? Well, the family always was bright, and brightness, as you know, decays brilliantly. Madness, most shining way. The elderly man, the eminent Throp, he's still alive. Sensible as an old plowshare. Survived his daughter and his granddaughter. Elphaba is the Throp third descending. She'll be the eminence one day. As a Munchkinlander, you know about such things. Nanny, don't gossip. It hurts my soul, Nessa Rose said. Oh, my pretty, don't you fret. This Bach is an old friend, or as good as, said Nanny. Out in the swamps of Quadling Hell, my friend, we've lost the art of conversation. We croak and chorus with what's left of the froggy folk. I intend to have a headache from shame, said Nessa Rose charmingly. But I knew Elfie when she was a small thing, said Bach. I'm from Rush Marshes and Wind Hardings. I must have met you two. Primarily, I prefer to reside at Colwyn Ground, said Nanny. I was a mortal comfort to the Lady Patra, the Throp's second descending. But occasionally I visit Rush Margins, so I may have met you when you were young enough to run around without trousers. How do you do? Said Nessa Rose. The name is Bach, said Bach. This is Nessa Rose, said Nanny, as if it were too painful for the girl to introduce herself. She was to come up to Shiz next year, but we've learned that there's a problem with some Gillicanese minder going loopy, so Nanny is called to step in. And can Nanny leave her sweet? You see why not? A sad mystery we hope for improvement, said Bach. At Crage Hall, Bach witnessed the reunion of the sisters, which was warm and gratifying. Madame Morrible had her grammatic thing, wheel out tea and brisks for the Throp females, and for Nanny, Bach, and Glinda. Bach, who had begun to worry about Glinda's retreat into silence, was relieved to see Glinda cast a hard, appraising eye over the elegant dress of Nessa Rose. How could it be, he wondered, if Glinda was wondering that two sisters should be disfigured and should clothe themselves so unalike? Elphaba wore the humblest of dark frocks. Today she was in a deep purple, almost black. Nessa Rose balanced on a sofa next to Nanny, who, assisted by lifting teacups and crumbling buttery bits of crumpet, was in green silks, the colors of moss, emerald, and yellow-green roses. Green Elphaba, sitting on her other side and lending her support between the shoulders as she tilted her head back to sip her tea, looked like a fashion accessory. The whole arrangement is highly unusual, Madame Morrible was saying, but we don't have unlimited room to accommodate peculiarities, and alas, we'll leave Miss Elphaba, Miss Glinda. Glinda is now, dear? How novel. We'll leave those two old pals as they are, and we'll set you up, Miss Nessa Rose, with your Nanny in the adjoining room that poor old Armor Clutch had. It's small, but you must think of it as cozy. But when Armor Clutch recovers? Asked Glinda. Oh, but my dear, said Madame Morrible, such confidence the young have. Touching, really, she continued in a more steely voice. You have already told me of the long-standing recurrence of this unusual medical condition. I can only assume this has deteriorated into a permanent relapse. She muttered in her slow, fishy way, her cheeks going in and out like the leather flaps of her bellows. Of course, we can all hope. Not much more than that, I'm afraid. And we can pray, Nessa Rose said. Oh, well, yes, that, said the head. That goes without saying, people of good breeding, Miss Nessa Rose. Bach watched Nessa Rose and Elphaba both blush. Glinda excused herself and went away. The usual pang of panic Bach felt at her departure was softened by knowing he would see her again in life sciences next week. For with the new prohibitions on animal hiring, the colleges had decided to give assembly lectures to all the students from all the colleges at once. Bach would see Glinda at the first coeducational lecture ever held at Shiz. He couldn't wait. Though she had changed, she had surely changed. Actually, there we go. We just gotta back up. Yep, that's perfect. Oh yeah, there you can see me more. 2. Glinda was changed. She knew it herself. She had come to shiz a vain, silly thing, and she now found herself in a coven of vipers. Maybe it was her own fault. She had invented a nonsense disease for Amma Clutch, and Amma Clutch had come down with it. Was this proof of an inherent talent of sorcery? Glinda opted to specialize in sorcery this year and accepted it as her punishment that Madame Morrible didn't change her ruby as promised. Glinda no longer cared. Beside Dr. Dillamund's death, a lot of other matters now seemed insignificant. But she didn't trust Madame Morrible either. Glinda had told nobody else that stupid and extravagant lie. So now she would no longer allow Madame Morrible so much as a finger hold into her life. And Glinda still didn't have the nerve to confess her unintentional crime to anyone. While she fretted, Bach, that pesky little flea, kept zizzing around her looking for attention. She was sorry she had let him kiss her. What a mistake. Well, all that was behind her now, that trembling on the edges of social disaster. She had seen the Mrs. Fanet, etc. for what they were, shallow, self-serving snobs, and she would have no more to do with them. So Elphaba, no longer a social liability, had all the potential of becoming an actual friend. If being saddled with this broken doll of a baby sister didn't interfere too much. It was only with prodding that Glinda had gotten Elphaba to talk all about her sister, so that Glinda might be prepared for Nessa Rose's arrival and the enlargement of their social circle. She was born on Colwyn grounds when I was about 3, Elphaba said. My family had gone back to Colwyn grounds for a short stay. It was one of those times of intense drought. Our father told us later, after our mother had died, that Nessa Rose's birth had coincided with a temporary resurgence of well water in the vicinity. They'd been doing pagan dances and there was a human sacrifice. Glinda had stared at Elphaba, who sounded at once unwilling and offhand. A friend of ours, a quadling glassblower, the crowd, incited by some rabble-rousing Pfeifers and a prophetic clock, fell on him and killed him. A man named Turtleheart. Elphaba had pressed the palms of her hands over the high uppers of her stiff-backed second-hand shoes and kept her eyes trained on the floor. I think that is why my parents became missionaries to the quadling people. Why they never went back to Coldwood Grounds or Munchkinland. But your mother died in childbirth? Said Glinda. How could she have been a missionary? She didn't die for 5 years, said I, looking at the folds of her dress, as if the story were an embarrassment. She died when our younger brother was born. My father named him Shell, after Turtleheart, I think. So Shell and Nessa Rose and I lived the lives of gypsy children, sloping around from quadling settlement to settlement with Nanny and our father Frex. He preached, and Nanny taught us and raised us up and kept house such as we ever had, which wasn't much. Meanwhile, Wizard's men had been draining the Badlands to get out the ruby deposits. It never worked, of course. They managed to chase the quadlings out and kill them, round them up in settlement camps for their own protection, and starve them. They despoiled the Badlands, raked up the rubies, and left. My father would bar me over it. There never were enough rubies to make it worth the effort. We still have no canal system to run that legendary water from the Vinkus all the way across country to Munchkinland. And the drought, after a few promising reprieves, continues unabated. The animals are recalled to the lands of their ancestors, a plow to give the farmers a sense of control over something anyway. It's a systemic marginalization of populations, Glinda. That's what the wizard's all about. We were talking about your childhood, said Glinda. Well, that's it. That's all part of it. You can't divorce your particulars from politics, Elphaba said. You want to know what we ate? How we played? I want to know what Nessa Rose is like, and Shell. It's getting a little too toasty. Farewell, great man. I'm gonna move you over here. There we go. All right. Okay, cool. Nessa Rose is a strong-willed semi-invalid, said Elphaba. She's very smart and thinks she is holy. She has inherited my father's taste for religion. She isn't good at taking care of other people because she has never learned how to take care of herself. She can't. My father required me to babysit her through most of my childhood. What will she do when Daddy dies? I don't know. I suppose I'll have to take care of her again. Oh, what a hideous prospect for a life, said Glinda before she could stop herself, but Elphaba only nodded grimly. I can't agree with you more. As for Shell, continued Glinda, wondering what fresh pain she might tread upon. Male and white and whole, she said. He's now about 10, I guess. He'll stay at home and take care of our father. He is a boy, just as boys are. A little dull, maybe, but he hasn't had the advantages that we've had. Which are, prompted Glinda. Even for a short time, said Elphaba, we had a mother. Giddy, alcoholic, imaginative, uncertain, desperate, brave, stubborn, supportive woman. We had her. Melina. Shell had no mother but Nanny, who did her best. And who is your mother's father? Excuse me, who is your mother's favorite? Sorry, said Glinda. Can't tell that, said Elphaba casually. Don't know. Would have been Shell probably, since he's a boy. But she died without seeing him, so she didn't even get that small consolation. Your father's favorite? Oh, that's easy, said Elphaba, jumping up and finding her books on her shelf, and getting ready to run out and stop the conversation in its tracks. That's Nessa Rose. You'll see that when you meet her. She'd be anyone's favorite. She skidded out of the room with no more than a brief flurry of green fingers. A goodbye. Glinda wasn't so sure she favored Elphaba's sister. Nessa Rose seemed so demanding. Nanny was overly attentive, and Elphaba kept suggesting adjustments in their living arrangements to make things perfect. Hitch the drapes to this angle instead of that, to keep the touch of the sun off Nessa's pretty skin. Can we have the oil lamp turned up high so Nessa Rose can read? No chatting after hours. Nessa Rose is retired, and she is such a light sleeper. Glinda was a bit awed by Nessa Rose's freaky beauty. Nessa Rose dressed well, if not extravagantly. She deflected attention from herself, though, by a system of little social tics, the head lowered in a sudden onslaught of devotion, the eyes batting. It was especially moving and irritating to have to wipe away a trickle of tears brought on by some epiphany in Nessa Rose's rich inner spiritual life, on which bystanders could have no inkling. What did one say? Glinda began to retreat into her studies. Sorcery was being taught by a louche new instructor named Miss Grayling. She had a gushing respect for the subject, but it soon became apparent like little natural ability. So that's the thing about the Land of Oz. Not everybody can perform magic, and it has to be a natural gift. You can't necessarily, with the exception of a few people, you have to have the natural talent in order to be taught how to do it. You can read all the books you want, but if you don't have the fire, the spark, the natural connection to it, it's just not going to work. So, for example, these books of the Wicked Years are very heavily involved in the lore of L. Frank Baum's The Oz, the Land of Oz books. So there's I think 16 different books. And one particular volume is one of my favorite out of all the Oz books. It's called The Patchwork Girl of Oz, which we will read for Storytime. Not Storytime After Dark because it's made for the kids. But Patchwork Girl of Oz is what I consider to be L. Frank Baum's answer to a character of color, and both literally and in reference to real-time character development. And she's very clever, she's smart, she's intelligent, she's loving, she is spiteful at times, but Scraps is her name, is the Patchwork Girl of Oz, and she's a fantastical character that I really, really love. But there's a moment in that book towards the end where, if you know the Wonderful Wizard of Oz story, you know that the wizard is a humbug. He's a fraud. He doesn't have any actual magical powers or anything like that. He's a con artist. But there's a point where he does leave Oz, and then he comes back to Oz and is taught by Glinda, who, and this is a bit of a time skip. This is way, 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 way later in the story. This is when Dorothy moves her and her Aunt Em and Uncle Henry and all the farm animals to the land of Oz, and then Dorothy becomes the Princess of Oz, and then Ozma is the ruler of all of Oz, and her and Dorothy are like best friends, which I think is so dope. So what happens is that Glinda actually figures out that the Wizard of Oz actually has magical potential, and so she trains him on how to be a sorcerer and use magic, but using it for the right reasons. So he had the potential, he just had no way of executing it or was properly taught in a way that was beneficial. So yeah, fun fact, which actually is going to connect to some later books in this series. At its most elemental, a spell is no more than a recipe for change, she would flute at them. When the chicken she tried to turn into a piece of toast began instead a mess of used coffee grounds cupped in a lettuce leaf, the students all made a mental note never to accept an invitation to dine with her. In the back of the room, creepy with pretended invisibility so that she might observe, Madame Morble shook her head and clucked. Once or twice she could not stop herself from interfering. Excuse me. No hand in the sorcerer's parlor, she would protest. Yet surely, Miss Grayling, you've omitted the steps to bind and convince. I'm merely asking, let me try. You know, I take a special pleasure in our training of sorceresses. Inevitably, Miss Grayling sat on what was left of a previous demonstration, or dropped her purse, collapsing into a heap of shame and mortification. The girls giggled and didn't even feel that they were learning much. Or were they? The benefit of Miss Grayling's clumsiness was that they were not afraid to try for themselves, and they didn't stint an enthusiasm if they managed to accomplish the day's tasks. The first time Glinda was able to mask a spool of thread with a spell of invisibility, even for a few seconds, Miss Grayling clapped her hands and jumped up and down and broke a heel off her shoe. It was gratifying and encouraging. Not that I have any objections, said Elphaba one day when she and Glinda and Nessa Rose, and inevitably Nanny, sat under a pearl fruit tree by the Suicide Canal, but I have to wonder, how does the university get away with teaching sorcery when its original charter was so strictly unionist?
Well, there isn't anything inherently either religious or non-religious about sorcery, said Glinda. Is there? There isn't anything inherently pleasure-faithist about it either.
Spells, changings, apparitions, it's all entertainment, said Elphaba. It's theater.
Well, it can look like theater in the hands of Miss Grayling. It often looks like bad theater, admitted Glinda. But the gist of it isn't concerned with application. It's a practical skill, like reading and writing. It's not that you can, it's what you read or write. Or, if you'll excuse the play on words, what you spell.
Father disapproved.
Mightily,
Nessa Rose said, the dulcet tones of the unflappably faithful.
Father always said that magic was the sleight of hand of the devil.
He said pleasure faith was no more than an exercise to distract the masses from the true object of
their devotion. That's a unionist talking, said Glinda, not taking offense. A sensible opinion, if what you're up against is charlatans or street performers. But sorcery doesn't have to be that. What about the common witches up in the Glingus? They say that they magic the cows they've imported from Munchkinland, so they don't go mooing over the edge of some precipice. Whoever could afford to put a fence on every ledge there? The magic is a local skill, a contribution to community well-being. It doesn't have to supplant religion. It may not have to, said Nessa Rose, but if it tends to, then we have a duty to be wary of it. Oh, wary, well, I'm wary of the water I drink. It might be poisoned, said Glinda. That doesn't mean I don't stop drinking water.
Well, I don't even think it's big an issue, said Elphaba. I think sorcery is trivial. It's concerned with itself mostly. It doesn't lead outwardly. Glinda concentrated very hard and tried to make Elphaba's leftover sandwich elevate outward over the canal. She only succeeded in exploding the thing in a small combustion of mayonnaise and shredded carrot and chopped olives. Nessa Rose lost her balance laughing, and Natty had to prop her up again. Elphaba was covered in bits of food, which she picked up herself and ate to the disgust and laughter of everyone else. It's all effects, Glinda, she said. There's nothing ontologically interesting about magic. Not that I believe in unionism either, she protested. I'm an atheist and an aspirationalist.
You say that to shock and scandalize, said Nessa Rose primly. Glinda, don't listen to a word of her. She always does this, usually to make Father irritant. Father's not around, Elphaba reminded her sister. I stand in for him, and I am offended, said Nessa Rose. It's all very well to turn your nose up at unionism when you've been given a nose by the unnamed god. It's quite funny, isn't it, Glinda? Childish. She looked spitting angry. Father's not around, said Elphaba again in a tone that verbally apologetic. You needn't rush to public defense of his obsessions. What you term his obsessions are my articles of faith, she said with a chilly clarity. Well, you're not a bad sorceress for a beginner, said Elphaba, turning to Glinda. It was a pretty good mess you made of my lunch. Thank you, said Glinda. I didn't mean to pelt you with it, but I am getting better, aren't I? And out in public. A shocking display, Nessa Rose said. That's exactly what Father would have deplored about sorcery. The allure is all in the surface. I agree. It still tastes like olives. Yes, that's a good one. Chapter 3. A few days later, Bach managed to catch Elphaba's eye at the break of their life sciences class. They met up in an alcove off the main corridor. What do you think of this new Dr. Nicodic? He asked. I find it hard to listen, she said, but that's because I still want to hear Dr. Dillamon. And I can't believe he's gone. On her face was a look of gray submission to impossible reality. Well, that's one of the things I'm curious about, he said. You told me all about Dr. Dillamon's breakthrough. Do you know if his lab has been cleared out yet? Maybe there's something there worth finding. You took the notes for him. Could there be the basis of some proposal or at least some further study? Bach is always nosy. He is always trying to be involved. Sometimes it's okay to not be involved. Sometimes. It really is, Bach. Just take a breath. Take a beat. She looked at him with a wiry, strong expression. Do you think I'm not way ahead of you, she asked. Of course I went tramping through there the day his body was found. Before anyone could lace up the door with padlocks and binding spells. Bach, do you take me for a fool? No, I don't take you for a fool, so tell me what you found, he said. His findings are well hidden away, she said, and though they are colossal holes in my training, I am studying it on my own. You mean you're not going to show me? He was shocked. It was never your particular interest, she said. Besides, until there's something to prove, what's the point? I don't think Dr. Dillamon was there yet. I'm a Munchkinlander, he answered proudly. Look, Elfie, you're more or less convinced me what the wizard is up to. The confining of animals back into farms to give the dissatisfied Munchkinlander farmers the impression he's doing something for them, and also to provide forced labor for the sinking of useless new wells? It's vile, but this affects Wen Hardings and the towns that sent me here. I have a right to know what you know. Maybe we can figure it out together. Work to make a change. You have too much to lose, she said. And I'm going to take this on myself. Take what on? She only shook her head. The less you know, the better. And I mean for your sake. Whoever killed Dr. Dillamon doesn't want his findings made public. What kind of friend would I be to you if I put you at risk too? What kind of friend would I be to you if I didn't insist? He retorted. But she wouldn't tell him. When he sat next to her during the rest of the class and passed her little notes, she ignored them all. Later, he thought that they might have developed a genuine impasse in their friendship had the odd attack on the newcomer not occurred during that very session. Dr. Nicodic had been lecturing on the life force. Entwining around each wrist the two separate tendrils of his long, scraggly beard, he spoke in falling tones so that the only first half of each sentence made it on the back of the room. Hardly a single student was following. When Dr. Nicodic took a small bottle from his vest and mumbled something about extract of biological intention, only the students in the front row sat up and opened their eyes. For Bach and Elphaba and everyone else, the patter ran. A little sauce on the soup, mumble, mumble, as if creation were a concluded mumble, 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 notwithstanding the obligations of all sentient mumble, 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 and so is a little exercise to make those nodding off in the back of the mumble, 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 behold a little mundane miracle, courtesy mumble, mumble, mumble.
attrition of excitement had woken everyone up. The doctor uncorked the smoky bottle, made a jerky movement. They could all see a small puff of dust like an effervescent of talcum powder jostle itself into a swimming plume in the air above the neck of the bottle. The doctor rode his hands a couple of times to start the air currents eddying upward, keeping some rare sort of spatial coherence. The plume began to migrate upward and over. The oohs that the students were inclined to make were all postponed. Dr. Nicodic held a finger out to them to shush them, and they could tell why. A vast intake of breath would change the pattern of air currents and divert the floating musk of powder, but the students began to smile despite themselves. Above the stage, amid the standard ceremonial stags, horns, and brass instruments on braid, huge four-oil portraits of the founding fathers of Ozma Towers in their ancient garb and serious expressions that looked out on today's students. If this biological intention were to be applied to one of the founding fathers, what would he say seeing men and women students together in the Great Hall? What would he have to say about anything? It was a grand moment of anticipation. Hey. Yes. That's awesome. Just got a message. But when a door to the side of the stage opened, the mechanics of the air currents were disturbed. A student looked in, puzzled. A new student, oddly dressed in suede leggings and a white cotton shirt with a pattern of blue diamonds tattooed on the dark skin of his face and hands. No one had seen him before, or anyone like him. Bach clutched Elphaba's hand tightly and whispered, "Look, a Winky!" A new student, oddly dressed in suede leggings and a white cotton shirt with a pattern of blue diamonds tattooed on the dark skin of his face and hands. This is a very important character, and it's interesting whenever they adapted Wicked into a musical and into a movie, they never accurately portrayed this particular character as he is described within this novel. But there's reasons for that. And so it seemed a student from the Vincus in a strange ceremonial garb, coming late for class, opening the wrong door, confused and apologetic. But the door had shut behind him and locked from this side, and there were no nearby seats available in the front rows, so he dropped where he was and sat with his back against the door, hoping no doubt to look inconspicuous. "Drat and damn, the thing's been shabbed off course," said Dr. Nicodic. "You fool, why don't you come to class on time?" The shining mist about the size of a bouquet of flowers had veered upward in a draft and had bypassed the ranks of long-dead dignitaries, waiting unexpected chance to speak again. Instead, it cloaked one of the racks of antlers, seeming for a few moments to hang itself on the twisting prongs. "Well, I can scarcely hope to hear a word of wisdom from them, and I refuse to waste any more of this precious commodity on classroom demonstrations." So basically, Dr. Nicodic has a magical powder that is very important in the Oz books that we will be introduced to later on again. It's called the Powder of Life. The Powder of Life is technically, well, in this point, it's not yet illegal in the land of Oz to have it. The Powder of Life is a mixture of so many different ingredients. The hair off a woozy, the left wing of a yellow butterfly, water from a dark well that has never touched sunlight, and there's two more ingredients. Like, it's all this stuff that is combined to create this potion that basically can bring whatever it touches to life. So it could be a doll, it could be a statue, a scarecrow, a car, a rocking horse, a building. It could be anything it touches, and it will come to life. Which is rather interesting that he has this on him, because later on, like I said, in the years to follow, this substance becomes illegal because people, they'll eventually abuse it. "The research is still incomplete, and I thought that mumble, mumble, mumble let you discover for yourself if mumble, mumble, mumble. I should hardly wish to prejudice your mumble." The antlers suddenly took a convulsive twist on the wall and wrenched themselves out of the oaken paneling. They tumbled and clattered to the floor, to the shrieking and laughing of the students, especially because for a minute Dr. Nicodic didn't know what the uproar was about. He turned around in time to see the antlers right themselves and wait quivering, twitching on the dais like a fighting cock all nastied up and ready to go into the ring. A rooster. Oh, well, don't look at me, said Dr. Nicodic, collecting his books. I didn't ask for anything from you. Blame that one if you must. And he casually pointed at the Vinkus student, who was cowering so wide-eyed that the more cynical of the older students began to suspect this was all a setup. The antlers stood on their points and skittered crab-like across the stage. As the students rose in common scream, the antlers scrambled up the body of the Vinkus boy and pinned him against the locked door. One wing of the rat caught him by the neck, shackling him in its V-yoke, and the other reared back in the air to stab him in the face. Dr. Nicodic tried to move fast and fell to his arthritic knees, but before he could right himself, two boys were up on the stage out of the front row, grabbing the antlers and wrestling them to the ground. The Vinkus boy shrieked in a foreign tongue. That's Croup and Tibbet, said Bach, jouncing Elphaba on the shoulder. Look! The sorcery students were all jumping on their seats and trying to lob spells at the murderous antlers, and Croup and Tibbet found their grips and lost them and found them again, until at last they succeeded in breaking off one driving tine, then another, and the pieces, still twitching, fell to the stage floor without further momentum. "Aw, the poor guy," said Bach, for the Vinkus student had slumped out and was volubly weeping behind his blue diamond hands. "I never saw a student from the Vinkus before. What an awful welcome to shiz." The attack on the Vinkus student provoked gossip and speculation. In sorcery the next day, Glinda asked Miss Grayley to explain something.
How could Dr. Nicodic's extract of biological intention, or whatever it was, how could it fall under the heading of life sciences when it behaved like a master spell? What really is the difference between science and sorcery? "Ah," said Miss Grayling, choosing the moment to apply herself to the care of her hair. "Science, my dears, is the systemic dissection of nature to reduce it to working parts that more or less obey universal laws. Sorcery moves in the opposite direction. It doesn't rend, it repairs. It is synthesis rather than analysis. It builds anew rather than revealing the old. In the hands of someone truly skilled—" At this she jabbed herself with a hairpin and yelped, "Oh, it is art! One might in fact call it the superior or the finest art. But it bypasses the fine arts of painting and drama and recitation. It doesn't pose or represent the world. It becomes a very noble calling." She began to weep softly with the force of her own rhetoric. "Can there be a higher desire than to change the world? Not to draw utopian blueprints, but really to order change. To revise the misshapen, reshape the mistaken, to justify the margins of this ragged era of a universe, through sorcery to survive?" At tea time, still awed and amused, Glinda reported Miss Grayling's little heartfelt speech to the two Throp sisters. Nessa Rose said, "Only the unnamed God creates, Glinda. If Miss Grayling confuses sorcery with creation, she is in grave danger of corrupting your morals." "Well," said Glinda, thinking of Alma Clutch on the bed of mental pain Glinda had once imagined for her, "my morals aren't in the greatest shape to start with, Nessa. If sorcery is to be helpful at all, it must be in reconstructing your character," said Nessa Rose firmly. "If you apply yourself in that direction, I suspect it will be all right in the end. Use your talent at sorcery. Don't be used by it." Glinda suspected that Nessa Rose might develop a knack for being witheringly superior. She winced in advance, even while taking Nessa Rose's suggestion to heart. But Elphaba said, "Glinda, that was a good question. I wish Miss Grayling had answered it. That little nightmare with the antlers looked more like magic than science to me. The poor Vinkus fellow. Suppose we ask Dr. Nicodic next week?" "Whoever would have the courage to do that?" cried Glinda. "Miss Grayling is at least ridiculous. Dr. Nicodic, with that lovable, bubbling, mumbling, incoherent way he has, he's so distinguished." At the Life Sciences lecture the following week, all eyes were on the new Vinkus boy. He arrived early and settled himself in the balcony. About as far from the lectern as he could get. Bach had the suspicion of nomads, all settled farmers, possessed. But Bach had to admit the expression in the new boy's eyes was intelligent. Averick, sliding into the seat next to Bach, said, "He's a prince, they say. A prince without a purse or a throne. A pauper noble, in this particular tribe, I mean. He stays at Ozma Towers and his name is Fierro. He's a real Winky, full-blood. Wonder what he makes of civilization." "If that was civilization last week, he must long for his own barbaric kind," said Elphaba from the seat of the other side of Bach. "What's he wearing such silly paint for?" said Averick. "He only draws attention to himself. And that skin. I wouldn't want to have skin the color of shit."
What a thing to say, said Elphaba. If you ask me, that's a shitty opinion.
Oh, please, just shut up.
I forgot, Elfie. Skin is your issue too, said Averick.
Leave me out of this, she said. We just had lunch, and you give me dyspepsia, Averick. You and the beans we had at lunch. I'm changing my seat, warned Bach, but Dr. Nicodic came in just then. The class rose to its feet in routine respect, then settled back noisily, chummily, chattering.
So basically what you're supposed to gather in the context of this story, which is very indicative of the time in which the Wizard of Oz was set. The Winkies and Fiyero are Native American, is how I read that. They are either Native American or they are a form of an African tribe. His skin is definitely brown. He's covered in tribal markings. So I would imagine he would be the Ozian form of a Native American or the Ozian equivalent of a African tribe member. That is how I interpret that character. It's very interesting that they never have actually accurately adapted Fiyero in the movie or in the Broadway musical adaptation, unless there is a Broadway showing where they had the Fiyero be cast with a brown man. So if that's a thing, please send me that video. But Jonathan Bailey, first of all, is an incredible actor and a great performer and is incredibly genuine on screen. So he owns that character. He did an incredible job as Fiyero. I loved it. But would I be interested in seeing the character more accurately portrayed in another medium? Yes. That's why I said they should develop a Wicked Netflix series where they adapt all 4 of the Wicked Years books into a 6-season show. That'd be perfect. For a few minutes, Elphaba waved her hand to get the doctor's attention, but she was sitting too far back and he was burbling on about something else. She finally leaned over to Bach and said, "After this, I'll change my seat and go forward so he can see me." And the class watched as Dr. Nicodic finished his inaudible preamble and beckoned a student to open the same door at the side of the stage that Fiyero had stumbled through the previous week. In came a boy from 3 Queens rolling a table like a tea tray. On it, crouched as if to make itself as small as possible, was a lion cub. Even from the balcony, they could sense the terror of the beast. Its tail a little whip the color of mashed peanuts, lashed back and forth, and its shoulders hunched. It had no mane to speak of yet. It was so tiny, but the tawny head twisted this way and that as if counting the threats. It opened its mouth a little terrified. Yup! The infant form of an adult roar. All over the room, hearts melted, and people said, "Aww." "Hardly more than a kitten," said Dr. Nicodic. "I thought to call it purr, but it shivers more often than it purrs, so I call it brrr instead." The creature looked at Dr. Nicodic and removed itself to the far edge of the trolley. "Now the question of the morning is," said Dr. Nicodic, picking up from the somewhat skewed instruments of Dr. Dillamon, who, mumble, "who can tell me if this is an animal or an animal?" Elphaba didn't wait to be called on. She stood up at the balcony and launched her answer out in a clear, strong voice. Dr. Nicodic, the question you asked was who can tell if this is an animal or an animal? It seems to me the answer is that its mother can. Where is its mother? A buzz of amusement caught in the swamp of syntactical semantics, I see, said the doctor merrily. He spoke louder as if having only now realized that there was a balcony in the hall. "Well done, miss. Let me rephrase the question. Will someone here venture a hypothesis as to the nature of this specimen and give a reason for such an assessment? We see before us a beast at a tender age, long before any such beast can command language if language were part of its makeup. Before language, assuming language, is this still an animal?" "I repeat my question, Doctor," sang out Elphaba. "This is a very young cub. Where is its mother? Why is it taken from its mother at such an early age? How even can it feed?" "These are burning questions to the academic issue at hand," said the doctor. "Still, the youthful heart bleeds easily. The mother, shall we say, died in a sadly timed explosion. Let us presume for the sake of argument that there was no way of telling whether the mother was a lioness or a lioness. After all, as you may have heard, some animals are going back to the wild to escape the implications of the current laws." Elphaba sat down nonplussed. It doesn't seem right to me, she said to Bach and Averick. For the sake of a science lesson to drag a cub in here without its mother. Look how terrified he is. It is shivering, and it can't be cold. Other students began to venture opinions, but the doctor shot them down one by one. The point being apparently that without language or contextual clues at its infant stages, a beast was not clearly animal or animal. This has a political implication, said Elphaba loudly. I thought this was life sciences, not current events. Bach and Averick shushed her. She was getting a terrible reputation as a loudmouth. The doctor dragged the episode out long after everyone had digested the point. Finally, he turned and said, Now do you think that if we could cauterize that part of the brain that develops language, we could eliminate the notion of pain and thus its existence? Early tests on this little Tom lion show interesting results. He had picked up a small hammer with a rubber head and a syringe. The beast drew itself up and hissed, and then backed up and fell on the floor and streaked toward the door, which had closed and locked from this side as it had done the previous week. But it was only Elphaba who was on her feet, yelling. Half a dozen students were shouting at the doctor. Pain? Eliminate pain? Look at that thing, it's terrified. It already gets pain. Don't do that. What are you, crazy? The doctor paused, visibly tightening his grip on the mallet. I will not preside over such shocking refusal to learn, he said, affronted. You are leaping to a harebrained conclusion based on sentiment and no observation. Bring the beast here. Bring it back, young lady. I insist. I shall be quite cross. But two girls from Briscoe Hall disobeyed and ran out of the room carrying the clawing lion cub in an apron between them. The room collapsed in an uproar and Dr. Nicodix stalked off the stage. Elphaba turned to Bach and said, Well, I guess I don't get to ask Glinda's good question about the difference between science and sorcery, do I? We were definitely headed down a different path today. But her voice was shaking. You felt for that beast, didn't you? Bach was touched. Elfie, you're trembling. I don't mean this in an insulting way, but you're nearly gone white with passion. Come on, let's sneak out and get a tea at the cafe at Railway Square. For old time's sake. I'm gonna save that for next Friday. And that is where we will end for tonight. Thank you all so much for joining me for Storytime After Dark. I love and appreciate you all's support, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.